Hey there, welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. And in this video, I'm going to kind of fundamentally change the way that you think about combat. At least that's my point. We'll see. I get so many people asking me about the idea of making combat more exciting. You see, if you do a quick search on YouTube, you see tons of videos by all the people you might think talking about making combat more exciting, adding this to combat. Why is it boring? Your combat suck. And I think so many of them are missing the point, at least the point that I would make, which is that it's not about how long your combat is. It's about how long it feels, right? It's the difference between waiting in line at the DMV for 10 minutes or watching a 10-minute YouTube video that's exciting or listening to a song that you love, right? The same amount of time has gone by, but in one you want to, wow, it's over already, I want to do it again. In the other one, it's excruciating, right? Because you don't want to be there. So this is the thing. We need to make combat fun. And that doesn't mean make it longer, which is, I think, what often happens when you do some of the things that people offer up as tips. So I'm going to kind of run through my philosophy, if you will, on combat and how I keep it moving, if you will, at my tables, and hopefully not boring. Roll initiative. Almost, I won't say everybody, but almost everybody gets excited when they hear those words, right? They look at their character sheet, they get their dice out, they're getting themselves ready. And then 5 minutes, 10 minutes into the combat, they're looking at their phones or thinking, really another round? And how do we prevent that? Now, I'm going to point out that, again, shortening combat isn't necessarily the goal here, although in a lot of cases it will be the case. Some people love long combats. Some people love strategic combat, minis, long thought out, sessions, that kind of stuff. And that can be really fun, but we also have to consider that everybody at our table is not going to be the same. So we don't want to, I often see advice where people are like, well, you have to do this much of your session so that these kind of players like it, and this much of the session so that these players like it. But the reality is, hopefully we have everybody liking everything all the time, which is pretty impossible, but we do our best. If we have a long drawn out strategic combat, we definitely want to telegraph that's going to be the idea of the session, and people can come into it with a different mindset, right? They can come into it saying, oh, today we're doing a big battle with minis, so effectively we're kind of playing a board game, we're playing a miniatures game, and they won't come in thinking, oh, I'm in my character, I'm doing this for the whole session. They're thinking, chips and friends and moving figures around and rolling dice. It's a different mindset, and that can also be really fun. But when you come into the session thinking, I'm in the dark dungeon, spending the time thinking about my character, maneuvering, and then it's like, ooh, why is this combat 45 minutes to kill these orcs? And what's the point, right? This then becomes the boring combat. So we really want to fundamentally think about, this is meta, outside the game, how we present these more elaborate combats, and also inside the game where they fit. So what I like to say is, what's the purpose of the combat? Now, a lot of people are going to say, or they'll make videos about this, and they'll talk about the purpose of the combat in the story. Well, the kingdoms over here have these people there, and they don't grow enough crops, and the gold. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What does the combat do for your game? That is, if you're playing, let's say, an OSR type game where resource management is really important, wandering monsters, for instance, which have no point to a, quote, story, have a huge point to the game. They are a resource drain. They are a time drain. They are a hit point drain, which don't get recovered as easily. They are arrow drain, any resource, spells. That's their point, right? These wandering monsters are things that are chipping away at the resources of our characters, making it harder for them to move forward through the dungeon and get the treasure, which is how they get experience points. On the other hand, if you're playing a game, let's say, that has really fast healing or common healing, and you're doing one combat a day, what's the point of those combats unless you just love mass combats? I mean, strategic combat, if you love that, then obviously that's something different, but you're probably not watching a video about why your combat is boring, right? So this is the thing, right? So if when I was running 5th edition a lot, when I was doing hex crawls and I was only encountering like 1 or 2 things a day, we would almost just storytell narratively what was going on unless it was a major thing that was important. If the 5th and 6th level group runs into 20 orcs, they're not going to, I mean, yes, I suppose there's a small chance that one of them might die, but really the chances are so small that you're better off just narrating that out, having the players take it. Say, you ran into these orcs and you were able to run them out. How did you do it? And just go around the table. Now this takes 5 minutes. Everybody's involved. It's a little storytelling. People like that. The players that don't like telling stories are just going to say, I used my axe and chopped their head off, whatever. That's also fine. And you're going to have this little moment around the table that is great and fun and kind of has that thing. So it's not just like you travel 16 days and nothing happens, which can also happen, right? What we want to do is make that kind of stuff fun. We're eliminating, right? We're eliminating the boring stuff, right? The sitting down to run through a combat that really doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt the characters. And I guess if you haven't played 5th edition, at the end of each long rest, so each night, you get all your spells back, you get all your hit points back. There's lots of resources in that game where like the time isn't as important, and people that play now can maybe tell me if things are changing. But Goodberry, things like that, where like water and food isn't super important. So really, one combat a day is just you sitting down to have combats. And that, if they're wandering monsters or random combats, just doesn't seem interesting or fun to me, and I would be bored, right? So that's why I just jumped past it as a DM. I was like, I don't think my players are going to like that, and they were happy to do it the way we did it. Change the way you think about combat. What is the point of this combat? I'm doing a dungeon crawl. Time's important. People might hear what's going on. The characters only have so many spells, and they've got to get to the end. Combat is relevant, right? Even if it's some random monster that doesn't have anything to do with your story. That's a relevant combat in the game. Okay, this is a big one, and stand back. Oh, you probably already read the thing. Stop with your set piece combats. Now, what I mean by that is you can have your big boss combat if that's the kind of game you run, but don't make every combat that. This goes counterintuitive to most advice you're going to see online, and that's fine. If that advice is working for you, do it. But lots and lots of complicated combats with timers and minions and extra things falling from the ceiling and all this stuff makes the combat longer. It doesn't necessarily make it more fun. For some people, it might be more fun, but I think a lot of times it just makes it go longer. The goal is to have the combat make a difference in the story for a reason, be fun, which a lot of times means short, and we'll get to that in a second, and flowing. We want to feel like it's flowing. So what we want is each turn, each player turn, not to take a long time. This is key. You want to get back around to the person. This way, whenever I get a new player into an OSR group and they play something like a magic user and they're in a combat and they can't really fight, I mean, they could, but it would be silly to run forward with your dagger and you don't want to cast a spell at that moment for whatever reason. That person is often doing something like getting oil out or going to the corner or grabbing the treasure and running, right? And that's not, their turn, if you will, is skipped as far as the combat's concerned. And that scares people that are used to the more modern games if they started that way. They're like, what can I do? And they spend 5 minutes effectively to say, I'm not doing anything. What you'll learn the more you play these games is, if what you're doing is really simple and repetitive, I'm hitting the orc in front of me with my sword, you don't need to spend a long time on that. If you're a magic user or any character that doesn't want to actually engage in the combat that round, it's fine to say, I'm going to move back out of range, get behind cover, and just look out to make sure nothing else is coming. Boom. You don't have to do something every single round. This is important. This is going to keep it flowing, which means that if your turn was boring because all you did was hit them with a sword, that's fine because it's back to you again in a minute or two because everybody at the table is also doing something simple. This is not to say you shouldn't do exciting things, both as players and DMs, but don't feel stressed that you have to do it every time. If the plan is to kill the orcs or goblins or trolls or whatever you're fighting in this room as quickly as possible to get the treasure and get out before you're noticed, just do that, right? It doesn't have to be something really super elaborate. Keep it simple. Simple will keep it moving fast. When it comes to you again quickly, it won't feel boring, even if the combat does take a while. Speaking of combats taking a while, I'll just throw in this. A couple of things. I made a video a while back about morale. This is huge. And also play monsters intelligently. And I don't mean that book that's really popular about how you have these low-level monsters kill everybody. I'm not sure I agree with that, but that's a whole other video. What I mean by this is if you're fighting 5 orcs and there's 4 PCs and they kill 2 of them, don't even bother to roll morale. They're outnumbered and 2 of their numbers dropped. Unless they've really hurt the PCs at that point, have them run or retreat or do something else. The combat doesn't have to go on another 10 minutes just so you can roll dice to kill these enemies. It can end there. I've had many combats where the PCs so outnumber a low-level monster where I just say, you know what, you guys wipe them out. Everybody take, and I roll a d6. Everybody take 3 more points of damage or something like that. And then that's it. It's like the combat's over because I kill it before it gets boring, before it gets to the players and they're just like, oh, it's my turn again. I hit. You don't want that, right? You want to keep this thing moving. So you are fine to do that. Again, as long as your play table and play style likes that, right? Most players are going to be fine with not having to play out the last couple rounds when they know nothing's going to happen except roll dice. Some players love that. Again, it depends on your table. Okay, so here's a process that I'm going to go through, and this should help. I'm going to start off by saying I like procedural combat. A lot of people will say procedural combat doesn't feel real, and again, I'm fine with that. I'm not one that believes that everything ties into the game. I think when you go into combat, you are effectively playing a different game. You switch to almost a board game, even if you're doing it theater of the mind. It's a different game. You have a game where you're solving puzzles. You have a game where you're playing in character, like play acting. You have a game where you're rolling dice and attacking monsters, right? There's different games. They smush together to become the thing that is RPGs. So I don't mind my combat feeling different. I feel like a procedural combat makes things stay more organized, first of all. So if you're a new DM, this is going to help you. It keeps things moving along. And again, it also lets players know what's going to happen so they are okay with skipping a turn if that's how it works out. So if you don't know what that means, I'm just going to go through it quickly. If you want like an example of a combat done out, I was going to do that, but I thought it would make the video really long. So if that's something you want, put it in the description and I'll do another video. But basically, in a procedural combat situation, in most cases, and I know they vary, at the very beginning of the round, you say to each player, what would you like to do this round? And they're going to reply with the category of thing they want to do. Move, melee, spells, missile fire. That's it. They can be a little more descriptive depending on your table. Some people like them to tell the exact spell they're going to cast. Some people say who they want to target. It's fine. To me, that's good enough. What do you want to do? I'm going to hit it with my sword. Okay, melee. And you'll see this if you watch my actual plays. I say that back to people like that because ultimately I want them to get in their mindset where they'll just go melee, sword. I just said sword. Melee, missile, right? Because I don't care if they're hitting with their sword at this point. I just want to know what they're doing, right? So they might say, I'm going to move forward and attack. Okay, so that's move and then melee. Okay, fine. I'm going to target a certain person. They might say that depending on what's happening. But again, missile's fine at that point. So we go around and then I will say, and it really depends. If it seems like they should know something, and I'll talk about this in a second, I will give them some hints. So in other words, I might say, you come into a room full of goblins, they reach for their swords, you can see that they're definitely not friendly, and they're about to charge at you. What would you like to do? I've given them some information. I've already told them what the goblins are going to do because they could tell at that point, right? I didn't keep it secret like there's goblins in the room. What do you want to do? Right? I'm giving them a little information. Now, once they tell me, then we roll initiative. Initiative is where things can really get mixed up and fun because if somebody wanted to shoot, let's say cast a spell, and the goblins charge and get on top of them and hit them, they might lose that spell. So this is risky and people know that, and that adds some drama to it. And again, I can talk about procedural combat a little bit more in another video if you want to know more about that. But just following the structure. We ask everybody what we're going to do. We roll initiative. Then things happen. You go in order. Missile fire, depending on your system, it might be a movement, missile fire, magic, melee. Some people don't like that order, whatever. But you need to use common sense as well. If I have an elf with a bow and they are 40 feet from the goblins and the goblins move is 40 feet, let's say, and the goblin wins initiative and is going to move and attack the elf with the bow, I will likely let them shoot the arrow if it's like the second round and we already know they're shooting their bow, right? It's like they've already got an arrow ready. They can shoot the goblin out of order and you'll do that. You just adjudicate that as it goes. But generally speaking, you're just going to go in order. You're going to go, okay, you won. Who's meleeing or who's moving? You move, you move, you move, move. Okay, you're facing the goblins now. Who's shooting an arrow? Boom, boom, boom. Who's casting a spell? Boom, boom, boom. That all happens. You circle back around. Okay, the enemies do their thing. Now we all roll dice. Next round. The important part to keep the combat feeling exciting and feeling like it's still moving along is you need to do a quick summary. At the end of each round, you'll be like, okay, so you guys came in the room, you saw the 6 goblins at the table, they grabbed their swords and charged at you, but the elf shot one with the bow and dropped him right away. The magic user took 2 out with a sleep spell. The 2 remaining goblins ran forward against the dwarf and the fighter who attacked them. The goblins are bleeding heavily and look like they're probably going to run. What do you want to do? Boom. Now we go around the table again, right? This is very simple and it keeps the motion going. People know what's going on. They're not forgetting. They don't have to worry too much about stuff. It does put a little burden on you as a DM if you're worrying exactly about ranges and stuff. But what I found is generally in a dungeon, which is where a lot of combat happens, everybody's usually in short range. It's pretty rare that you're very far away. So, unless you're super far away for whatever reason, you don't have to worry too much about things. I know that there's all these different systems, close, far, move, this, all this abstract, but even if you use the real numbers, most of the time, once you close on somebody, you're close enough that you can just kind of move around. I don't worry too much about that. I worry about movement and ranges when people are retreating or when they start very far away, especially outside. We don't have to worry about those things because I could sit there and figure it all out. But yeah, you're in short range. I mean, you're in a 60-foot room. That's pretty much short range for anything, right? Easy as that. This makes combat go quickly. It moves along. It's pumping. And again, if we get to that magic user the second round and they already cast their spell and there's only 2 goblins left and they might run, when you get to that magic user, they're going to say, I'm just going to back up a bit so I don't get targeted by the goblins, but I'll look down the hallway behind us to make sure nobody's coming. Boom. They're not casting a spell. They're not going to roll dice that round. They're just doing that. And that's fine. Elf with bow might say, I do the same. You know, I focus my bow down the corridor. Fighter and dwarf are going to say, melee, melee. Boom. We roll dice. The goblins want to run, let's say, and they win initiative. They try to run. They do a full retreat. That means that the fighter and a dwarf can follow them. You know, that's allowed in BX game, let's say. They cut them down as they're running. Now I do a final summary. All right, you came into this room with these 5 goblins. They tried to charge at you. 3 of them were killed, 2 in melee, 1 with a bow. There's 2 sleeping goblins there. There's a table here. You see a chest in the corner, blah, blah, blah. Now we're back out of combat. That took almost no time at all. It was the adrenaline from that initial like roll initiative is still pumping through everybody's veins, and we had that combat. It served its purpose. It took time. It took resources. Now that magic user uses a sleep spell, so when they run into the ogre in 4 rooms later that they could have taken out, guess what? That fight's going to be a lot harder. This is how we make combat fast and not boring. We don't add volcanoes and we don't add 17 extra actions and we don't put a lot of terrain in there. You can do that. And those things should be reserved for, in my opinion, what I will call, and I said not to make every battle list, set piece battles. When you get to the big boss, if you're doing that kind of a dungeon, and there's like the snake god is being summoned by the demon priest, and there's 15 minions in there, and there's fire shooting up from the ground, and there's all these like magical spells going on. That's your set piece battle. And again, we telegraph that as best as possible by saying, hey, next session, hopefully you have the plan. We're going to do this set piece battle and it's going to be epic. Bring your minis, right? Or however you're going to do it. And this again changes the mindset for the players. They come into it knowing, if they're not a player that loves, you know, combat, they come into it knowing they're going to eat chips and hang out with their friends. And that's what they're expecting. They're not expecting a lot of research and role play and exploration. They're expecting that combat, and they will enjoy it because they knew what they were getting into. When you are walking through a dungeon and you know, exploring and having fun doing that, and then all of a sudden the combat takes an hour because everybody's trying to figure out their turn, that becomes not fun for a lot of people that don't enjoy combat. Now, I will say, because I know a lot of people here play other systems, I used procedural combat and side initiative when I ran 5th edition after about a year of running it, because I found that individual initiative made the game go slow. It made everything feel tedious. It was really a drag. And also, I like initiative every round. I think it spices it up, which again, you don't always know that you're going to go before the goblins. It's going to roll every time. So again, that adds that extra bit of pressure. So I think using a procedural combat, and again, you're in a game, you know that what I've heard the most is, oh, magic users take forever. Well, you know what? When you get to the magic user, you go, what are you going to do? If they say spell, well, when it gets back around to them, they better have that spell ready, right? That's just the way it is. And they already made the choice. If they're like, well, you know, I'm not going to cast a spell, then okay, then you don't cast a spell. We skip you this round. Speeds things up. It's easy. It's fast. It's exciting. My players love it. I think yours will too. If you use this kind of combat, let me know below in the comments. If you don't and you want to try it, let me know. If you think this is completely wrong, let me know that too. I would love to hear it. So anyways, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're going to have some news coming up soon. People have been asking me about things like Discords and Patreons and mailing lists and all sorts of stuff. So I've decided to break down and do it. So get ready for all that stuff. If you're interested in more Bandits Keep, you're about to get it. I'll see you next time.